We've got, of course, the rainfall from the recent storms causing a lot of damage, some of the worst flooding Hawaii has seen in decades. And meanwhile, folks over there in Lahaina still struggling to rebuild following the August 8th, 2023 wildfires. And even though some legal barriers to rebuilding have been addressed, well, good folks, the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii believes that the entire state could learn from Maui's experience with the wildfires to help speed rebuilding efforts after the recent floods. And joining me to discuss that, the very knowledgeable Jonathan Helton, the policy analyst at the Institute. And good morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning to you, Johnny. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
I wish we wouldn't have to be talking about rebuilding efforts after disaster, but we're here to do that today. We'll see if the state can learn from Lahaina rebuilding efforts. All right, it's been more than 2.5 years since those wildfires destroyed most of Lahaina. What sort of progress is being made on that rebuild?
I think it would be fair to characterize the rebuild as slow but steady. So I'll just throw some numbers at you. So I looked today at the Maui permit dashboard, and there's been over 180 permits that have been completed. So that's good news. There's about 300 homes that are under construction right now. So there's some, I guess you could say, light at the end of the tunnel in terms of rebuilding. But I think there is one thing that's important to point out, and that's that there has not been a single commercial rebuild permit approved. It's been almost 2.5 years since the fires. All of those businesses on Front Street, throughout the Lahaina town, they have not yet been able to come back.
They just made an announcement today. Well, it's Maui now, that Lahaina Jewelry, which was on Front Street next to Kimo's, has reopened, and they'll have a blessing, I believe, Saturday. And but they have to relocate. Obviously, not going to be on Front Street. So businesses looks like they're going to have to take that route.
Yes, a lot of people, I think, have already decided, hey, we're going to reopen somewhere else in Lahaina or somewhere else on the island. The rebuilding process for the area around Front Street has been so complicated.
But the harbor is making progress. Do you have any new news on that? More?
Yes, the harbor itself, I think, is underway. The harbor is sort of a really interesting story because for a lot of the rebuilding, you have to go through mostly the county. But for the harbor, a lot of that you have to go through the state. Mm-hmm. So whether that's the State Department of Transportation or State Department of Land and Natural Resources. And I think for a lot of dredging projects, you also have to go through Army Corps of Engineers. So in a lot of ways, the progress that's being made there, all of the approvals that they're having to go through and the work they're having to do really looks different from what you're having to do if you're trying to rebuild a home or business.
And, of course, the recent rains have really affected Maui once again. Even Lahaina was impacted. Do you know the extent of that? We know what happened to Kihei, and maybe you can touch on Kihei if you have any knowledge about that and what they're going to have to go through for their rebuilding process.
Yes, we've already seen data that's been reported for Honolulu in terms of damage reports and for Hawaii Island. Mm-hmm. I personally am not aware of any data that's come out from Maui County as to how many homes have been destroyed or damaged by the recent floods. I would anticipate, and I would hope, that the County of Maui there, for anybody who's been affected by the floods and is trying to rebuild in Kihei, that they will open some of those same expedited permitting lanes that they offer to folks in Lahaina, and even the Kula wildfires that happened the same time back in August 2023. So if they do that, that will really speed the process for someone wanting to repair their home.
Yeah. Do you have any updates? You mentioned Kula. Anything as far as home building in that area on Maui?
Yes. So looking specifically at Kula, the extent of the damage wasn't as big, of course, mm-hmm. But there's already been 4 permits that have been completed, or I think 4 homes that have been already rebuilt, and about a dozen permits that have been completed. So it wasn't the extent of the damage wasn't the same, and there weren't as many businesses in the area mm-hmm. that were affected. Anytime you're trying to rebuild a business or build a business from scratch in Hawaii, the amount of approvals and permits you have to get is typically a lot more than if you're just trying to rebuild a home.
Jonathan Helton, policy analyst at the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, discussing if any lessons can be learned for rebuilds after the recent floods based on the Lahaina fires of 8/8 to 23 and what they're doing to rebuild homes and businesses and lives over there. Jonathan, has Maui County been able to process these building permits in a timely manner, in your opinion?
I think the answer is that it's been a mixed bag. The county back in April 2024 hired a private contractor to manage the rebuilding permits for Lahaina and Kula, and that I think that really helped because it did two things. Number one, it allowed the county to focus on all of the other permits that it was normally getting, right? Just the day-to-day work. So it also opened up the door for people to use an agency that was already, maybe an agency isn't the right word, to use a business that was already familiar with post-wildfire rebuilds. This is the contractor the county hired. They had a lot of specialization with handling wildfire permitting after some of the fires in California. So I think that's why they were selected for the job.
But people are obviously still running into some issues to getting their permits improved. Can you maybe bring forward some examples of that, if you have any?
Yes, there's been two things that have been really holding up some of the commercial rebuilding in Lahaina. So the first one is some of the historic reviews. Mm. So if you are in a county historic zone, or if you're in the Lahaina Historic Landmark District, typically if you want to build or rebuild anything, you have to get approval from the County Cultural Resources Commission. Now, unfortunately, for whatever reason, whether it's because they don't have enough members or because the members can't make scheduling work, that commission has missed almost every other meeting since the Lahaina wildfires. There was a period of time in the year after the fires that they maybe met twice, when they're supposed to meet at least every month. So it's really hard to get your rebuilding plan approved because you might go to the commission and they might not approve it on the first meeting. They might say, we want more information. And then you're gathering that information, but if the next two meetings are canceled, you're looking at 3 months down the road before you can even get another hearing and maybe then get your permit approved. So a lot of the holdup has been there. I am happy to report that as of February, the Maui Office of Recovery issued a directive that basically said, if your business complies with these design guidelines for what we want the rebuilt area to look like, then you can skip the commission review. Mm. So I'm hopeful that some of these commercial permits that are coming in will be able to use that route and will be able to get a quicker permitting process as a result. But still to date, we haven't seen any been approved.
And right now it's still too early, but people are going to need to have extensive work done on, I believe it's over 20 homes that were destroyed by the floods on Oahu. Not sure the extent of damage on Hawaii Island yet. Didn't hear much about Kauai, but as far as Oahu's concerned, they're going to probably run into some permitting delays also. And then, of course, the flood insurance problems, what have you. So are there any lessons that can be, not learned, but can you see any similarities in as far as rebuilds are concerned with the homes on Oahu after the Konolo storms, comparing it with the Lahaina fires? Yes.
So first, I'll throw some statistics out there. So on Honolulu, it was about 20 homes destroyed, about 250 sustained major damage. And then on Hawaii Island, the county there said it's been about 375 homes were damaged or destroyed, and there's been about 75 businesses that were damaged. So, of course, the scale of this disaster is, of course, much smaller than what happened in Lahaina, but there are things that are still applicable. So I'll just give you one example. If you are within a certain distance of the coastline, your property will be considered to be in the special management area. Now, often, if you were trying to build something in the special management area, you're going to have to get some sort of permit for that. The extent of the permit and how much time and how much in fees you're going to have to pay totally depends on what you're building. Again, for a business, it's much more than for a home. But after the Lahaina wildfires, the governor issued an emergency proclamation that waived some of the special management area. That was really critical for rebuilding, and a lot of people have been able to use that exemption. The state legislature followed it up last year by passing a piece of legislation that put the governor's emergency order into state law. So in state law, there is supposed to be an exemption for rebuilding projects. Now, part of the issue is that with how convoluted some of Hawaii's land use regulations are, the counties, they have to change their rules to reflect state law for those exemptions to actually be useful. So what we've seen is that Maui County has adopted that. But if you look at the three other counties, at the moment, none of the other counties have adopted the change that the state made to that law. So it's entirely possible that if Honolulu and Hawaii and Kauai don't update their rules, you're going to have people come in and try to get a rebuilding permit, and then they're going to get stuck in this incredibly long and drawn-out process of getting a special management area permit.
Wow.
And I know that sounds like it's a lot. That's just one example. There could be, depending on where your home or business was located and how it was affected by the storms, you could have to comply with, half a dozen different land use laws, and they can each be that complicated in some cases.
Do you have any knowledge about how complicated the process will be for farmlands?
I think that depends on what you're trying to rebuild. So under state law, there is supposed to be an exemption that if you're trying to build a barn, for example, the type of permits you have to get very minimal. If you have something that's a little bit more extensive that was damaged, let's say you had some sort of food processing machinery or some sort of commercial structure like that, that could get pretty complicated to rebuild. It would look something like trying to rebuild a business in a lot of ways. So you need that would go through additional layers of review.
Jonathan Helton with the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, the policy analyst over there. We're looking at a lot of damage, and money-wise, does the state have any estimate of how much damage has been done? And then with the emergency declaration coming from Washington, D.C., how will that make things easier, in your opinion, or for the governor to make decisions now to move things forward on the state level?
Right. So very thankful for the disaster declaration that was issued at the federal level, because that's going to reduce the burden on the state and the burden on residents who are affected. So the governor has said that the cost of the disaster was close to $1 billion. I've seen estimates by outside groups that put it as much as $2 billion. So, that's talking about lost property, lost homes, damage to farms, damage to infrastructure like roads. So that's a pretty all-encompassing estimate. So we've seen slightly smaller numbers for city-owned property. So Mayor Blangiardi said the cost to the city-owned property was maybe about $100 million. And on Hawaii Island, Mayor Alameda said that the estimate was about $60 million. It was about $30 million on Hawaii Island. So, these costs are certainly nothing to, they're nothing to ignore. That's going to affect the city budget. The city's going to need to find money for that. But I'm very thankful that some of those costs might be able to be covered by FEMA. And I'm also thankful that the floods were nowhere near as bad as wildfire in terms of the human cost and the economic cost.
Yeah. So taking that into account, is there anything officials could learn from the wildfire rebuilding that might apply to the storm recovery? We've gone over a few, but is there anything more?
I think the biggest thing I would say, sort of a high level, is that rebuilding needs to be predictable. People need to know, I can submit my building permit, and I'm going to be able to expect to get my permit in X amount of time. And on Maui, they've tried to do that, but partially because Lahaina was so old and there were so many layers of regulation there, it has been anything but predictable. So you've seen a lot of people who are they're waiting on other people to get their permits, and they're not applying. And as a result, they aren't able to try to work through the process. And so, it's sort of like everybody is looking at everybody else to waiting for somebody to apply. And as a result, you're seeing that the process is slow and it's unpredictable for what permits are going to be required. Beyond that, my encouragement to some of the counties other than Maui is, number one, adopt that state language for special management area. That's really important. And number two, I would say waive fees for rebuilding permits. Maui County hasn't done this yet, and we've seen that for some of these projects where people are coming in and trying to rebuild, the building fees associated with that can be, in the tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what the project is. And for people who are trying to just get back on their feet, I think that is the least that the counties could do, is to say, hey, you're not going to have to pay that $2,000, $5,000 fee just to rebuild your home.
Yeah, exactly. How about with the permitting process? What do you know about Maui County? We know, and we've heard a lot of stories about the permitting process over here with not the right amount of staff. They're changing to a new system, more maybe AI involved in that. Is that what's taking place on Maui? Because they talk about that being done on Oahu, and folks are supposed to be patient with that rollout.
On Maui, they're definitely dealing with a shortage of staff. Across the state, across the county government, there's shortages in public works and planning, in water supply and housing, all of these agencies that are associated with getting permits out. Maui County has not switched over to any new permitting system recently, so I think that that is one headache that the people who are trying to just get a permit have not had to deal with. I'm very hopeful that the new Honolulu system will reduce delays in the long term. But we saw this a couple of years ago in Hawaii County. I think it was back in 2021. County switched over to a new permitting system, and I don't know if there had been not enough trial and error done, or not enough focus groups to work with architects and builders to see if the system was usable. But it ended up being a whole debacle where a lot of permits ended up getting canceled that shouldn't have been canceled, or people didn't know how to use the new system. And so, we're seeing it play out again here in Honolulu. It's my hope that if either Maui or Kauai decide to get a new permitting system in the next couple of years, that they do their due diligence a little bit better, and I think maybe they could make it smoother sailing for everyone.
All right, Jonathan Helton, policy analyst at Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Appreciate his time on this Sunday. Let's wrap it up with the state legislature. They've almost concluded their business for the year. Switching back to Maui, are there any Lahaina-related bills you were following? I saw your piece in Maui News about the ADUs and what they can do with that, and that bill seems to be promising. What's going on over there at the ledge?
Up at the legislature, Grassroots has been following the one big piece of Lahaina legislation. Of course, there's the ADU bill you mentioned. That's working its way through the county. We're hopeful that will get passed sometime this year. At the state, we're following a bill that would exempt infrastructure projects from the special management area. So the same process as I described before. Last year, the state created an exemption for rebuilding. This year, they're considering creating an exemption for basically so that the county of Maui can rebuild the infrastructure in Lahaina. So sewers, water pipes, adding in roads, sidewalks, etc., without having to go through a bunch of extensive permits and hearings just to be able to rebuild back what was there. So we're hopeful that passes. I think if it passes, what you're going to see is that maybe some of the county infrastructure rebuilding will be a little bit quicker, and I think that's a good thing for everybody.
All right, Jonathan Helton from Grassroots Institute of Hawaii has joined us this Sunday. Can you let them know how they can find your work, not only with the Grassroots, but elsewhere around the state?
Of course. I think the best way to do that is to go to our website, which is grassrootinstitute.org. You can also reach out to me. My email is jhelton, Helton, at grassrootinstitute.org. I'm always happy to hear from anybody who's been affected by a permit delay or having an issue with getting a permit. Grassroots, we are a research and advocacy organization. So we are always interested in how are the laws of the state and of the counties affecting people's everyday lives. And then we're also interested in how we can try to change those laws to make it a little bit easier to, in this instance, rebuild your home or business.
All right, appreciate the information. It's Jonathan Helton from the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Hope to be speaking to him soon about another important topic. Have a great remainder of your Sunday, Jonathan, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, Johnny, you too.